What if I told you that everything you know about surviving when civilization collapses is backwards? That the real danger isn't learning how to build a shelter or find water. It's something far more insidious, something that's been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years. Welcome back to the Unnamed channel, where today we're exploring the psychological survival skills that nobody talks about, the ones that will either save your mind or break it when the modern world suddenly stops working. Most survival guides focus on the physical. They teach you shelter, water, fire, food. But here's what they miss. In the first 72 hours after a major collapse, more people will lose their minds than will die from exposure. The statistics from historical disasters, from the 1918 flu pandemic to Hurricane Katrina to the Chilean miners trapped underground, all point to the same truth. Psychological breakdown happens before physical failure. Your brain isn't designed for the absence of normal stimuli, and that absence will kill you faster than hunger ever could. Let me break down what actually happens when you lose the grid. Within hours, you lose electricity. Within days, you lose information flow. Within weeks, you lose social contact. But what actually kills you, what breaks the human spirit faster than anything else, is the loss of temporal rhythm. We don't just live in time, we live in the expectation of time. We know when dinner comes, when work starts, when our friends will text us. When that structure vanishes, your nervous system enters what neurologists call temporal dysregulation. Your cortisol spikes randomly. Your sleep cycles shatter. You can't remember if it's been 3 days or 13. And that's when the real survival begins. The forgotten survival trick that nobody teaches you is this. You must rebuild temporal structure the moment the grid fails. Not eventually, immediately. This is more important than your first meal, more critical than your water source. Why? Because a person with rhythm, with structure, with a sense of measured time, can survive almost anything. A person without it will panic, make catastrophic mistakes, and potentially end their own life despite having everything they need to survive physically. The first forgotten trick is creating a temporal anchor. You need to rebuild your sense of day and night, of hours and minutes. This seems laughably simple, but it's revolutionary. A person who can track time, whether through a sundial, water clocks, shadow observation, or even just counting breaths, maintains their sense of agency. Agency is what prevents psychological collapse. When you control time, even in a small way, you control your narrative. You're not a victim of circumstance anymore. You're a conscious agent moving through a structured world. The second trick is something anthropologists call ritual maintenance. Here's what's wild. Humans don't just need routine. We need ritual. There's a difference. Routine is habitual action. Ritual is habitual action with meaning attached to it. When society collapses, your morning coffee routine becomes meaningless. But if you transform that routine into a ritual, a deliberate, intentional practice with symbolic weight, suddenly your mind re-engages. Maybe that morning coffee becomes a moment of gratitude for shelter and warmth. Maybe you always make it at sunrise while facing east. Maybe you share it with your survival group with specific words. The content doesn't matter. The ritual structure is what rewires your brain from panic mode to purposeful mode. I know what you're thinking. That sounds like self-help nonsense, not actual survival. But let me hit you with the neuroscience. When your brain engages in ritual behavior, it activates the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, the parts responsible for interoception. That's internal sense-making. Ritual literally rewires your nervous system from threat detection mode to meaning-making mode. It's not that ritual helps you feel better. Ritual fundamentally changes what your brain is searching for in the environment. Instead of scanning for threats, it starts scanning for patterns and significance. That shift is the difference between someone who survives 3 months before giving up and someone who survives 3 years until actual rescue or resettlement. The third trick nobody talks about is community architecture. Here's the counterintuitive part. You cannot survive long-term isolation alone, and the moment society collapses, your first instinct will be to isolate. Every survival movie shows the lone wolf, the self-sufficient individual who needs nobody. That's survivorship bias. The reality is that every long-term survival situation that didn't end in death involved some form of community, even if it was just two people. And the communities that thrived had one specific structure: distributed responsibility with shared meaning. What that means is this: you cannot be the person who knows everything. You cannot carry all the responsibility. The moment you try, your brain will burn out. Instead, you need a system where each person has authority over something specific. One person is the water keeper. One person is the fire keeper. One person is the territory mapper. One person is the knowledge keeper. Even if you're alone initially, create these roles for yourself psychologically. You're not just surviving, you're a water keeper who also happens to be a fire keeper. This splits your identity across multiple domains, preventing the crushing weight of total responsibility. The fourth forgotten trick is documentation. In our digital age, we've outsourced memory to devices. The moment the grid fails, you lose that. But here's the psychological survival benefit of keeping a journal or record that goes far beyond practical information. Documentation creates narrative coherence. Your brain is a storytelling machine. When you're in survival mode, your brain wants to make sense of chaos by turning it into narrative. If you don't guide that narrative, your brain will construct one anyway, and it will be catastrophic. You'll start seeing patterns that aren't there. You'll start believing you've failed when you haven't. You'll distort time and memory. But if you actively document, even if it's just a few lines each day, you force your brain to construct coherent narrative. You're the author of your story, not a victim of it. This is why Holocaust survivors who kept diaries had different long-term psychological outcomes than those who didn't. Documentation wasn't just record keeping, it was narrative agency. It was saying, I am still here, still thinking, still making meaning. The fifth trick that modern survival guides completely ignore is celestial reorientation. When you lose artificial light, when you lose the internet, when you lose constant stimulation, something profound happens. You reconnect with the cosmos. And I don't mean this in some spiritual New Age way. I mean this literally and neurologically. The human brain evolved to navigate by the stars. We have neural pathways that respond specifically to celestial observation. When you spend time learning constellations, tracking planetary movements, and understanding your place in the universe, you activate those ancient pathways. What emerges from celestial reorientation is what I call scale recalibration. In modern life, we're trapped at human scale. Everything is designed for our bodies and immediate sensory perception. But in the collapsed world, you need your brain to embrace multiple scales simultaneously. Your body at one scale, your community at another, your territory at another, and the cosmos at the largest scale. This prevents the psychological suffocation that comes from thinking only about your immediate problems. A person who can look at Orion and remember that those stars have been burning for billions of years while civilizations rise and fall, that person has access to emotional regulation resources that someone without that perspective will never have. The sixth trick is embracing seasonality. And I mean really embracing it, not just noticing it. Modern life has eliminated seasons psychologically. Your house is the same temperature year-round. Your food is the same year-round. You work inside regardless of season. But human psychology evolved in a seasonal world. We have neurochemical seasonal cycles that modulate mood, energy, sleep, and motivation. When you ignore seasonality, you're asking your brain to run at constant output. When the grid fails and you're forced into seasonality, your nervous system actually recalibrates into something healthier. But here's the survival part that changes everything. If you proactively align your psychological practices with seasons, you prevent the burnout that usually follows survival stress. In spring, when light returns and energy surges, that's your time for expansion, building, planning. In summer, when energy peaks, that's your time for maximum output and community engagement. In autumn, when there's abundance before scarcity, that's your time for preservation and gratitude practices. In winter, when everything wants to rest, you practice deep reflection and restoration. Align with this, and you ride the natural wave of human neurochemistry. Resist it, and you'll exhaust yourself in 6 months. The seventh forgotten trick is something that goes against every modern instinct: radical listening. In a collapsed world, information becomes scarce and precious. But the information that matters most for psychological survival is not tactical information, it's human information. It's knowing that other people's inner lives are real and complex and valuable. When society collapses, people tend to become transactional. You're not my friend anymore. You're the person who knows how to trap rabbits, or the person who has medicine, or the person who can fix tools. But the people who actually survive long-term collapses, who don't descend into tribalism or violence, are the ones who maintain what you might call narrative empathy. They stay curious about why other people believe what they believe, fear what they fear, hope for what they hope. And the practice that builds this is radical listening. It sounds soft, but it's actually radical, because in a survival situation, listening feels like a waste of time. You want information, solutions, efficiency. But listening, actual, slow, curious listening, where you try to understand someone else's internal world, that maintains the psychological infrastructure that prevents atrocity. It prevents your survival group from turning on each other. The eighth trick is what I call meaning maintenance protocols. In normal life, meaning comes from external sources. Your job gives you status, your social media gives you validation, your possessions give you identity. When all that vanishes, your brain will desperately search for meaning sources. If you don't guide that search, it will find meaning in destructive places: conspiracy theories, scapegoating, obsessive control. But if you establish meaning practices, whether that's art, whether that's craft, whether that's teaching younger people, whether that's maintaining something beautiful just for beauty's sake, you're rebuilding the psychological infrastructure of meaning from the inside. This is why every long-term survival situation in history has produced art. Not because people had time for art, but because art is what prevents humans from becoming mere survival machines. Art is how we tell ourselves that we're still human, still conscious, still capable of creating beauty despite everything being on fire around us. The ninth trick is territorial intimacy. When you lose the larger world, your world shrinks to your territory. And there's psychological danger in that shrinkage. It can feel claustrophobic and suffocating. But there's also psychological opportunity. Most modern humans have no real relationship with the ground beneath their feet. You can live in a city your entire life and know virtually nothing about the specific ecosystem supporting you. But in survival, you're forced into relationship with your territory. If you embrace that forced relationship instead of resisting it, you gain something profound: belonging. Your territory isn't just survival infrastructure, it becomes home, in a way home has become for almost no modern human. You don't just learn where water is and where shelter is. You learn the story of your territory. You learn which animals use which paths and why. You learn where plants grow and what that tells you about soil and water underground. You learn the history of the land. Was there a fire here 50 years ago? Was there a flood? What does the forest composition tell you about what happened in the past? Every time you go out into your territory with curious intention rather than just extraction intention, you build relationship. Now, if you want to go deeper into how to actually implement these psychological protocols, I've put together a comprehensive guide in the description and in the pinned comment that walks through each of these practices step by step with specific exercises you can start doing right now. The 10th forgotten trick is what I call emotional weather observation. And this one is perhaps the most important psychologically, because it's where most people actually collapse. When you're in survival mode, your emotions become intense and volatile. You have hope surging one moment, despair crushing you the next. Many people interpret this emotional volatility as a sign they're breaking, that something is wrong with them. But actually, this is completely normal neurology in a high-stress situation. The danger isn't having intense emotions. The danger is losing awareness of your emotional states and letting them drive your actions unconsciously. The practice that prevents collapse here is what I call emotional weather observation. You treat your emotions like weather patterns. You don't try to change them or judge them. You observe them. You might notice despair is moving through my system like a storm front. It's heavy, it's dark, it's real. And also, like all weather, it will pass. This simple reframing, from I am despairing to despair is moving through me, changes your relationship to your emotions from identity to observation. And observation creates distance. Distance creates choice. When you have distance between yourself and your emotions, you can choose not to act from them. The 11th trick that modern survival completely ignores is what I call failure renarration. In a collapsed world, you will fail constantly. You'll fail at building things, at finding food, at solving problems. And most survival guides ignore the psychological aspect of this constant failure. But repeated failure, without renarration, drives people into learned helplessness. You start believing that you can't do anything, that nothing works, that you're fundamentally incapable. You tried to start a fire with damp wood and it didn't work. A person without renarration practice thinks, I can't start fires. A person with renarration practice thinks, I learned that when wood is damp, I need to look for deadfall standing wood. And I learned this because I tried something that didn't work, and I stayed curious about why. This shift from I failed at this to I learned this through attempting is what prevents psychological collapse during extended survival. Every person who has survived genuine long-term crises has had to master this renarration skill. Now, here's where most survival content gets it wrong. They show you techniques, but they don't show you the mental architecture that keeps you alive when techniques fail. And they will fail. Your shelter will leak. Your fire will go out. Your water source will freeze. Your food will spoil. What separates someone who adapts from someone who breaks is not luck. It's how they talk to themselves when things go wrong. The second foundational skill is what I call resource translation. Most people think survival is about having specific tools. You need a knife. You need matches. You need a water purifier. But what actually happens in uncontrolled situations is that you're always missing something. You're never going to have the exact right tool. Instead, what separates effective survivors from ineffective ones is the ability to look at your environment and ask, what can this thing do besides what it's designed for? A knife isn't just a knife. It's a shovel, a saw, a fork, a hammer, a scraper, a cutting tool, a fire striker depending on what surface you use it against. A plastic bottle isn't just a water container. It's a fire starter when filled with water and placed in sunlight. The water acts as a lens. It's a signaling device. It's a heat conductor. It's a flotation device. It's a cooking vessel if you know how to heat water without putting the bottle directly in flame. The difference between someone who survives and someone who doesn't often comes down to this. The survivor sees a piece of bark and thinks about all the things bark can become. The non-survivor sees a piece of bark and sees only bark. This is a skill you can develop right now. Go into your kitchen or your bedroom. Pick up 5 random objects. For each one, spend 2 minutes asking yourself, what could this do if I didn't have access to stores? A hairbrush becomes a fire-laying tool. A belt becomes a tourniquet, a rope, a carrying device, a binding. A book becomes tinder, becomes insulation, becomes a water filter component. A shoe becomes a water carrier, a tool handle, a smoking vessel for meat preservation. Your brain doesn't naturally think this way, but like re-narration, it's a skill that builds with practice. The third skill is what researchers call environmental pattern recognition, but I call it learning to read the landscape. Every environment tells you stories if you know how to listen. When you're moving through wilderness, you're not just walking, you're collecting data constantly. Where is the water? Not just, there's a stream over there, but why is the water there? What does the presence of water tell you about what else is nearby? What plants grow near water in this climate? What animals? What does the vegetation density tell you about soil quality, and therefore the likelihood of edible plants? Some of the best trackers in the world aren't special because they have supernatural abilities. They're special because they ask questions. They notice that moss grows thicker on certain sides of trees depending on climate and latitude. They notice that certain animal tracks cluster in certain places during certain seasons. They notice that water moves in patterns, and those patterns reveal the terrain even when you can't see far ahead. They notice that certain birds call at certain times, and those calls communicate danger or safety or food sources to anyone who understands the language. This is pattern recognition, and it's a fundamental survival skill that most people never develop because they're too distracted to notice. Here's the practice. The next time you're outside, and this could be your backyard, a park, or actual wilderness, stop moving for 5 minutes. Just stand there and ask yourself questions. What's the dominant plant here? Why? What insects do I see? What does that tell me? What's the elevation like? Is water higher or lower than where I'm standing? What would an animal need to survive here that I might also need? You're not trying to survive. You're training your brain to notice the constant information stream that every landscape broadcasts. The fourth skill is shelter construction, but not in the way you're probably thinking. Most survival content shows you elaborate shelter designs that take hours and require materials you might not have. What you actually need to understand is the principle. Shelter's job is to create a microclimate. It doesn't need to look like a house. It needs to do one job: Prevent your body from losing heat faster than you can generate it. A proper shelter doesn't require a saw or an axe or pre-measured materials. It requires understanding three things: airflow, insulation, and ground isolation. You need your shelter to block wind without trapping moisture. You need insulation between you and the cold ground. Never sleep directly on earth. And you need to understand how heat actually moves. In cold conditions, your biggest enemy isn't the air temperature. It's radiant heat loss and conductive heat loss. You lose more heat through contact with cold ground than you do through the air around you. This is why a shelter that's too big is worse than a shelter that's small. A small shelter means your body heat can't dissipate into endless space. It stays concentrated, and you stay warm. You can practice this right now. Build a small debris shelter in your backyard or a park. Spend 30 minutes inside it. Notice how your body temperature changes. Notice what works and what doesn't. This isn't wasting time. This is training your body and your brain to understand shelter at a level that goes beyond theory. The fifth skill is water sourcing and purification, and this is where most people get dangerously casual. You can't just drink from a stream because you're thirsty. Giardia, cryptosporidium, bacteria, parasites, these aren't theories. They're invisible passengers that will make you extremely sick if you're not careful. But here's what most survival guides don't tell you. Purification doesn't require modern tools. It requires understanding. The most reliable purification method is boiling. Not 30 seconds of boiling. Genuine sustained boiling for at least 1 minute, preferably 3 to 5 minutes at elevation. If you have containers, you can boil. If you don't have metal containers, you can use bark containers or stone containers and bring water to boil by dropping heated rocks into it. This method has been used for thousands of years. It works. But you need to know why it works. Heat denatures pathogens. They can't survive above a certain temperature. This is the principle that matters, not the specific tool. There are other methods too. It's not as reliable as boiling, but it works in a pinch and requires nothing but time and clear weather. Filtration can reduce certain pathogens and improves taste, though it won't fully purify water. You should always boil or treat water that's been filtered. Salt water can be distilled through solar distillation. Place salt water in a shallow pit, cover it with plastic or clear material, and water vapor will condense on the underside of the covering and drip into a collection vessel. The salt stays behind. But here's what's critical. You need to practice these methods before you need them. Don't wait until you're desperate to figure out how to make a solar still. Build one now. Test it. See how long it takes. Understand the limitations. If it doesn't work the first time, debug it. This is exactly the renarration principle I mentioned earlier. You're not failing, you're learning. Which brings me to the sixth skill: food procurement and plant identification. This is the one that scares people most, and rightfully so. This is an area where you learn with absolute precision, or you don't eat. But here's the honest truth about wilderness survival and food. Unless you're in a place with abundant, obvious food, berry bushes, nut trees, fish-filled streams, you're not actually getting significant calories from foraging. You can supplement with gathered foods, absolutely. You can find nuts, seeds, and berries in many climates, but the calorie density of foraged foods is usually much lower than you need for sustained activity. Most people who survive long-term wilderness situations do so because they had some kind of emergency ration or because they were found relatively quickly. What matters most in food procurement is understanding the seasonal patterns of your area and knowing what's actually available in your specific region. A plant identification book for North America won't help you in Southeast Asia. A book for desert plants won't help you in temperate forests. You need regional knowledge, and you build that through patient observation and study before crisis happens. Join a local foraging group, take a class, read field guides specific to your region, spend time learning what grows near your home. An infection can become sepsis. Sepsis can kill you. This is why basic first aid and understanding infection prevention matters more than you might think. The most critical principle here is cleanliness and keeping wounds protected. You need to clean injuries thoroughly with clean water. If you have clean cloth, keep the wound covered to prevent dirt and insects from accessing it. If the wound is deep or gaping, you need to understand when closing it is worse than leaving it open. Closed wounds in contaminated conditions just create pockets where infection thrives. Let minor wounds air out if they're clean. Keep major wounds clean and covered, but allow drainage. Change dressings regularly with clean materials. This requires discipline and attention, but it's how people stay functional during extended survival situations. You also need to understand pain management without medications. Cold water numbs. Elevation reduces swelling. Immobilization prevents further injury. Movement, even when uncomfortable, prevents stiffness and maintains circulation. These aren't advanced medical techniques. They're principles of keeping your body functional when you're dealing with pain. And equally important, mental management of pain. Pain is real, but your reaction to pain is partly controlled by your attention. If you can narrate your experience as, this is manageable discomfort that I'm working through, rather than, this is agony and I'm broken, your actual experience changes. This brings us back to the re-narration principle. These 7 skills, re-narration, resource translation, pattern recognition, shelter construction, water purification, food knowledge, and injury management, these form the foundation of genuine wilderness survival capability. But they're the skills that determine who survives and who doesn't. Now, let me tell you something that most survival content won't mention because it's not exciting. The vast majority of people who find themselves in genuine survival situations are not there because they plan to be. They're there because something unexpected happened. A car broke down on a remote road. A hiking trip got worse than expected. Someone got lost. An emergency created an immediate crisis. This is why the mindset going in matters as much as the skills. If you're the kind of person who panics when plans change, you're already at a disadvantage. If you're the kind of person who becomes problem-solving focused when things go wrong, you're already ahead. One person looks at a broken car and thinks, "I'm stuck, and this is terrible." Another person looks at a broken car and thinks, "My location is now different than planned. What do I have? What can I do? What's the priority right now? Staying safe, staying warm, being findable." These two people have radically different survival odds even before they've done anything. This is why the mental and psychological preparation actually matters more than memorizing 50 different techniques. If you can stay calm, think clearly, and work with what you have, you can figure out what to do. If you panic, you waste energy and make poor decisions. The resource that goes much deeper into these foundational skills is in the description and in the pinned comment if you want to build a genuine survival practice, something more substantial than just watching videos about survival. It's worth exploring if this is something you actually want to develop rather than just be passively informed about. There's a real difference. I want to close with one more perspective on all of this. The skills we've discussed, renarration, resource translation, pattern recognition, shelter construction, water purification, food knowledge, and injury management, these aren't just survival skills. They're life skills. They're ways of thinking about problems that apply to regular life too. When you practice renarration by turning failures into learning experiences, you're building resilience that applies to job losses, relationship challenges, health issues, and everything else. When you practice resource translation by asking, "What else could this be?" you're building creative problem solving. When you practice pattern recognition by observing nature carefully, you're building attention and perception. When you practice shelter construction by understanding principles instead of memorizing designs, you're learning to think systematically. When you practice water purification by understanding the science, you're building scientific literacy. When you study plant identification, you're building observational precision. When you manage minor injuries carefully, you're learning to handle problems methodically. These skills make you more capable in the wilderness. Yes, but they also make you more capable at living. They make you more resourceful, more observant, more resilient, more creative, more systematic. These are the kinds of people who navigate life better, crisis or no crisis. And here's the beautiful part. You don't need to be in crisis to practice these skills. You don't need to wait for an emergency. You can build this capability right now in your regular life, and it will both make you safer in actual emergencies and make your everyday life more interesting and more engaged. Think about navigation for a moment. Most of us rely entirely on our phones. GPS is incredible, but what happens when the battery dies? Or there's no signal? The forgotten skill here isn't just reading a map, it's learning to notice landmarks, a distinctive tree shape, the way water flows, the direction the sun rises and sets, how shadows move through your day. The ancient skill of wayfinding wasn't about having perfect tools. It was about developing an intimate relationship with the landscape around you. And once you start doing this, really looking at where you are, something strange happens. You become more present, you notice things, you feel safer because you understand your environment instead of being lost in it. Knot tying is another one. We've outsourced this to carabiners and Velcro and quick releases. But a properly tied knot is elegant. It's physics made practical. It's also meditative. Tying knots slowly and deliberately engages a different part of your brain than scrolling. And there's satisfaction in mastery. Real, tangible mastery of something tactile. Shelter building teaches you about physics, weather exposure, and resource efficiency. But here's what most survival guides miss. The skill also teaches you about space and comfort. How do you arrange things so they're functional and livable? How do you use what's around you to solve a problem efficiently? These principles apply to how you organize your apartment, how you design your workspace, how you think about the spaces you inhabit. And there's listening, real listening, not just hearing, but tuning into subtle sounds. What does a forest tell you if you're quiet enough to hear it? Water finding its path, animals moving, wind patterns changing. This sensitivity to your auditory environment, it's atrophying in most of us. We're drowning in artificial noise. But relearning how to listen is relearning how to be aware. Food preparation without electricity. Cooking with fire. Understanding the difference between a raging flame and coals that actually cook things evenly. These skills connect you to something fundamental. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years, and there's something deeply grounding about understanding how to feed yourself from heat and materials you've gathered yourself. Plant identification is survival. Yes, but it's also wonder. Learning that a plant you walk past every day is edible, that another is medicinal, that a third has been used for thousands of years for rope or fiber or dye. You start seeing your environment not as empty space, but as full of potential. Every walk becomes a learning expedition. And documentation. Keeping a nature journal. Sketching what you see. Writing observations. This isn't just for survival. It's for understanding. Detailed observation of the world is becoming rare. When you're forced to really look at something to draw it, or describe it accurately in writing, you stop skimming life and start living it. Celestial navigation. Understanding the stars, where they move, what they tell you about time and direction. This is the oldest GPS system humans had, but it's also a practice in humility and scale. When you actually study the night sky, you're reminded that you're small, that there's vastness, that humans have been oriented by these lights for millennia, and you're joining that tradition. Cordage making, basketry, leatherworking. These ancient crafts are skills that translate to patience, precision, and understanding material properties. They also produce something useful. In a world of mass production, making something functional with your own hands is radically different from acquiring something. Water purification without modern systems. This is essential knowledge, but it's also knowledge that reconnects you to a basic requirement of survival. Understanding where water comes from, how to make it safe, how precious it is. This changes how you think about water forever. Fire mastery. This is primal. Understanding fire, how to create it from friction, how to feed it, how to control it, how to use it wisely. This connects you to the first major technology humans ever discovered. There's something deeply satisfying about creating fire and understanding that you're repeating something humans have done since before language. First aid without professional equipment. Understanding how to assess an injury, stop bleeding, prevent infection, immobilize something safely. These skills are about capability and confidence. When you know how to help, you're less afraid. Weather prediction without instruments. Learning to read clouds. Understanding pressure systems through how you feel. Knowing when rain is coming based on observing nature. This is attention. This is presence. This is trading constant weather apps for actual awareness of the atmosphere around you. Here's what I want you to understand, though. When I talk about these forgotten skills, I'm not suggesting you become a mountain hermit. I'm not promoting some romantic notion that civilization is bad and we should all flee to the wilderness. What I'm suggesting is that these skills and the mindset they create, the observational clarity, the resourcefulness, the patience, the systematic thinking, the comfort with uncertainty, these are valuable right now, in your current life, in your actual circumstances. The person who can fix something broken instead of replacing it is demonstrating resourcefulness in 2024. The person who can cook from raw ingredients is demonstrating knowledge and presence. The person who can navigate without GPS is demonstrating confidence and awareness. The person who can start a fire is demonstrating competence and self-reliance. These forgotten skills are bridges. They bridge ancient human knowledge and modern life. They bridge capability and confidence. They bridge understanding your environment and feeling lost in it. And the most important thing, you don't have to be perfect at any of these skills. You don't have to choose between modern life and wilderness capability. You can integrate these practices gradually. Start with one, learn it, practice it, then add another. Build your capability season by season, year by year. The wilderness has lessons for people living in cities. The ancient has value for the modern. The forgotten might be exactly what we need to remember. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that there's a more detailed resource available in the description and pinned comment that explores each of these skills with practical steps you can actually implement. If any of this resonates with you, I'd recommend checking that out. It'll give you concrete starting points. So here's my final thought. Survival skills aren't about doom and gloom. They're not about fear or catastrophe. They're about capability. They're about being engaged with reality instead of insulated from it. They're about having a relationship with your environment, natural or urban, that's based on understanding rather than dependency. Start small. Notice something today that you usually ignore. Listen to sounds around you for 5 minutes without distraction. Read a map without GPS. Cook something from raw ingredients. Do something with your hands that you usually outsource. These aren't survival skills yet. They're presence skills. They're awareness skills. And from there, if you want, you can go deeper. The grid might go down someday, or it might not. But your life is happening right now. These skills make you safer in emergency. But more importantly, they make you alive in the present. Thank you so much for watching this far. I know it was longer than usual, and I really appreciate you sticking with me. If this perspective on survival and capability resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to make sure you never miss a new upload,